In 1999, 30 teenagers set off for a carefree graduation adventure, their laughter echoing as they boarded a yellow school bus. They never returned. For 25 years, their disappearance haunted Washington as a chilling unsolved mystery, until a hiker uncovered a rusted bus hidden deep in the Pine Ridge National Forest, revealing moldy yearbooks, scattered bones, and a terrifying secret that refused to stay buried. They were 30 teenagers, full of life, headed for one last adventure before adulthood. Then they vanished without a trace. No calls, no bodies, just silence. For 25 years, the story of the class of '99 was nothing more than a terrifying urban legend, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires. That is, until a hiker stumbled upon a rusted school bus in the woods, swallowed by moss, filled with moldy yearbooks, and something else, something no one was prepared for. On June 5, 2024, in Washington's Pine Ridge National Forest, a seasoned hiker, off his usual trail, caught sight of a strange yellow object through the trees. Hello. Thanks for watching and being part of this journey. If you enjoy stories like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means the world. Now let's dive into the story. Thinking it might be old equipment or a ranger outpost, he got closer, only to find the shattered shell of a school bus. Half consumed by the forest, the number on the side was almost unreadable. Inside, time seemed to have stopped. Dusty backpacks still strapped to seats, faded Polaroids, a cassette player lying on the floor, warped by moisture, pages from a yearbook stuck together from mold. But in the very back seat, there was a pile of clothing and, beneath it, what was unmistakably a human jawbone. When investigators arrived, they immediately connected the bus to one of the most chilling cold cases in Washington history, the disappearance of Maplewood High School's senior class of 1999, during their graduation trip. But the deeper they looked, the more impossible it all became. There was no record of the bus ever being rented, no trail cameras had picked up its entry, no road nearby, and inside were personal items belonging to nearly every single missing student. Some belongings were intact, others were arranged deliberately, like a message or a ritual. What happened on that bus wasn't an accident. And what the forest kept hidden for over 2 decades was more than a tragedy. It was a secret no one was meant to find. The halls of Maplewood High School buzzed with the electric energy of seniors on the brink of freedom. Locker doors slammed, laughter echoed down corridors, and teachers wore the weary smiles of people counting down the days. It was May 1999, and for the class of '99, graduation was just around the corner. Among the sea of navy caps and gowns being prepped for the big day, 28 students stood out, not because they were extraordinary, but because they were close, a tight-knit group grown together over the years through shared classrooms, heartbreaks, inside jokes, and Friday night games. Sarah Thompson walked the hall with effortless grace, a folder clutched to her chest. She was everything her parents hoped for: valedictorian, student council president, future Ivy Leaguer. Her father, Mayor James Thompson, never missed a chance to mention her achievements during city speeches. But those who knew Sarah closely saw the pressure behind her polished smile. The late-night study sessions, the panic attacks hidden behind bathroom stalls. Not far behind, Michael Carter darted into the AV room, camera in hand, narrating his own mockumentary of high school life. Michael was the class clown, bold, relentless, occasionally obnoxious, but his eyes carried a sharpness few noticed. He planned to turn the camping trip into his final project, a time capsule of their last week together. Going to be my Blair Witch, but funnier, he joked. David Wilson towered over most of his classmates, shoulder pads long since replaced with the proud weight of a full-ride football scholarship to Washington State. Everyone expected big things from David: coaches, classmates, his mom especially. But with every scholarship offer came a growing fear. What if he failed? What if the best years of his life were already behind him? Then there was Olivia Chen, the girl whose presence was often marked only by the soft scrape of pencil on paper. Her sketchbook never left her side, filled with portraits of classmates who never knew they'd been drawn in forest scenes she claimed came to her in dreams. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when she did, it lingered. Olivia wasn't exactly part of the group, but somehow they all trusted her. As the final bell rang on a Friday afternoon, the school was alive with celebration. Someone blasted Green Day's "Good Riddance" from their car stereo. Teachers handed out final permission slips, and talk of the upcoming trip to the Pine Ridge Wilderness dominated every conversation. On June 7, 1999, it was supposed to be a celebration. 30 seniors from Maplewood High School had been planning the graduation trip for months. After finals, college acceptance letters, and years of small-town monotony, this trip was their moment of freedom. The destination: a remote campground nestled deep within Washington's Pine Ridge National Forest, isolated, scenic, and far from parents, curfews, and rules. They left that Saturday morning in a yellow school bus driven by Mr. William Foster, a substitute driver filling in for the usual one who had called out sick the night before. Departure was cheerful. Students waved to their families, backpacks stuffed with snacks and sleeping bags. A few parents captured grainy camcorder footage, laughter, cheers, and a group photo just before boarding. That was the last anyone would ever see of them. That evening, one of the parents, Mrs. Margaret Olson, received a voicemail at 6:45 p.m. It was from her daughter, Hannah, with muffled laughter in the background, someone yelling, "Turn that off." Then a pause and silence. No goodbye, no hang-up, just static. When the bus failed to check in at the campground that night, it was first assumed they'd gotten delayed. The weather had turned foggy. Roads in the forest were narrow, barely paved, and lined with sheer drop-offs. Parents called, but no one answered. By Sunday morning, panic set in. Search and rescue teams were dispatched. Helicopters scanned the region. Dogs tracked dead ends. But there were no tire tracks, no cell phone pings, and no broken branches to follow. The campground host confirmed no yellow school bus had arrived. The bus and its passengers had simply vanished. On the third day, search teams widened their perimeter. 1 week later, a local fisherman found something strange near a riverbend 12 miles from the main road, a disposable camera lying half buried in the mud. The casing was cracked and water damaged. When investigators opened it, they found it empty. The film inside had been removed. 8 days after that, another mystery surfaced. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, whose son Ethan was among the missing, received a letter in the mail. No return address, no postmark, just 5 words written in shaky handwriting. "We made it. Please stop looking." At first, the note gave them hope, but handwriting experts reviewed it. The curves of the letters were off. The pressure was inconsistent. It looked almost like Ethan's writing, but not quite. The final verdict: likely forged, possibly traced. Still, the note sparked rumors. Some said the kids had staged the disappearance. Others whispered about cults or strange rituals in the woods. Some believed the students were still alive, hiding. But the facts remained the same. No trace of the bus, the driver, or the 30 students. No witness ever came forward. Nobody was ever found. And after 3 months, the case was quietly closed, labeled an unsolved missing persons event. But the parents never stopped looking. Some walked the forest trails every year. Others posted photos on missing persons boards. And one father, Richard Lopez, kept a journal documenting every theory, every strange tip, every sleepless night. He once wrote, "I don't think they drove off the road. I don't think it was an accident. I think something took them, something that didn't want them found." He never explained what he meant, and no one ever proved him wrong. 24 years had passed. The halls of Maplewood High School echoed with the sounds of new students, new laughter, and new memories, but a shadow lingered. A plaque near the entrance bore the names of 30 students etched in bronze beneath the words, "Gone, but never forgotten, class of 1999. The school held a memorial every June. Teachers would light 30 candles. Some had retired early, unable to bear the weight of unanswered questions. Others stayed, haunted by the faces they once taught, faces that remained forever young in their minds. Across town, time hadn't moved much faster. Bedrooms once filled with teenage posters, textbooks, and cologne-scented air remained untouched. Beds were made the same way. Trophies, dresses, and half-written journals waited on shelves, as if their owners had simply stepped out and might return any minute. Some parents clung to hope like oxygen. Others sank into quiet grief, the kind that didn't scream, it just settled. Mr. Bennett, whose son Nathan was class valedictorian, spent most days at the local library rereading his son's final essay over and over. Mrs. Garcia, whose daughter Sophia played varsity soccer, watered the same garden Sophia planted weeks before the trip. She never touched a petal. But no one held on tighter than Sarah's mother, Elizabeth. While others buried their hope with the passing years, Elizabeth sharpened hers into resolve. She refused to mark a grave, refused to sign any legal declaration of death. She kept Sarah's toothbrush in the holder, her voicemail greeting intact, and her bed freshly made every morning. "She's not gone," Elizabeth would say. "I don't know where she is, but she's out there. I feel it." Neighbors called it denial. Her family called it grief. On June 5, 2024, nearly noon, a hiker named Daniel Harper, an off-duty firefighter from Spokane, Washington, decided to explore a trail system rarely used, deep inside the Pine Ridge National Forest. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just solitude and silence. But a few hours in, after bushwhacking through thick undergrowth far beyond the marked paths, he saw something strange. A flash of yellow, almost entirely buried in brush and decay. As he cleared back the ferns and dead vines, the shape began to form. Metal, windows, cracked rubber tires sunk deep into the earth. It was a school bus, rusted, broken, its frame twisted and smothered by years of growth. The number on the side was faint, nearly gone, but just barely readable. Number 42. The door was jammed, swollen from weather and time. He forced it open, coughing as stale air poured out. The interior was a tomb. Dust and mildew clung to every surface. Seats were ripped. Ivy grew through shattered windows. On the floor, rotting but still recognizable, lay school bags, Letterman jackets, and a pair of moldy graduation caps. A jacket with a Maplewood High School crest hung limply on the edge of a seat. At the back, lying beneath collapsed luggage racks and debris, he spotted the bones. Not one set, but several. Some were fully skeletonized, others were partially decayed. It took him a moment to understand what he was seeing. Multiple sets of human remains, 15, later confirmed. He called 911 immediately. Within hours, the site was cordoned off by law enforcement. Investigators, forensic teams, and anthropologists swarmed the scene. And just like that, the mystery that had gone cold in 1999 was suddenly burning again. The media descended. Families who had spent 25 years grieving or hoping were forced to relive it all over again. The investigators began cataloging the contents of the bus. Most items were weather damaged, some were destroyed beyond recognition. But in a cracked, mold-covered backpack shoved under the driver's seat, they found something unusual. A manila folder, waterlogged but still intact. Inside were hand-drawn sketches, charcoal and pencil, signed in the bottom corners by Olivia Chen, one of the missing seniors. Her body was not among the remains. The sketches were haunting, disturbing. One showed a ring of figures standing in a forest clearing, surrounding a fire. Another showed faces hidden behind crudely drawn masks, blank, expressionless. Another sketch, darker and more frenzied, depicted blood dripping from tree branches, forming a circle on the forest floor. Symbols were scrawled in the background, none matching any known language. Some pages appeared torn or ripped from a journal. The last sketch in the folder showed what looked like the school bus, but different, surrounded by tall, faceless silhouettes. In the front window, behind the wheel, was a mask. Investigators identified the remains using dental records and DNA. Of the 32 people who disappeared, 30 students and 2 teachers, 15 bodies were accounted for, but 15 students were still missing, as were both teachers, including Mr. Robert Klein, the app history teacher, and Miss Laura Mitchell, the chaperone. The discovery shattered any remaining theories that the class simply ran away or died in a crash. The bus was too deep in the forest, with no path wide enough for a vehicle of that size to reach without a trace. No roads nearby, no tire marks. It didn't crash there. It was placed there, hidden. Why only 15? Where were the others? And why was Olivia, a quiet student who barely spoke in class, drawing scenes that looked like rituals? Investigators combed the area within a half-mile radius, but the dense terrain slowed the search. No footprints, no remains outside, just silence and the weight of something they couldn't quite explain. The case was reopened, not just as a recovery, but as a possible crime scene. Foul play was suspected. And as the sketches were leaked to the press, a new theory began to circulate, one far darker than anyone had considered before. What really happened to the class of '99 in those woods? And who, if anyone, planned for them never to return? Days after the discovery of the school bus in the Washington woods, the police station in Pineville was flooded with news vans, investigators, and concerned citizens. The entire state was buzzing with the mystery. What had happened to the class of 1999? What was the meaning behind the bones found inside the rusted school bus? And why, after more than 2 decades, had nothing surfaced until now? Then, on the morning of June 12, an unassuming figure walked into the Pineville police station. The early morning haze lingered in the air, and the fluorescent lights of the station hummed with the usual monotony until the door swung open and a man stepped inside. He was gaunt, thin to the point of appearing almost fragile. His face was unshaven, his clothes ragged, a tattered jacket hanging loosely from his skeletal frame. His long, disheveled hair clung to his face, as if he hadn't combed it in years, and his eyes, sunken with exhaustion, darted nervously around the room. Here is the corrected punctuation for the provided text. The officers, caught up in their own discussion about the bus discovery, fell silent when they saw him. The man didn't seem to notice the sudden shift in the air. He approached the front desk slowly, almost methodically, before leaning forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Michael Carter from the class of 1999. For a moment, no one moved. The words hung in the air, charged with the weight of 25 years of unanswered questions. The officers exchanged confused glances, as if waiting for a punchline, but none came. This couldn't be real, could it? The last time anyone had heard Michael Carter's name was when he, along with the rest of his senior class, had vanished during their graduation trip. No body had ever been found, no trace. One of the officers, Sergeant Rachel Evans, stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Carter, can we get your identification?" Michael didn't respond. Instead, his eyes flicked nervously around the room, like someone constantly looking over his shoulder. "I was never supposed to come back," he mumbled, his voice trembling. "They're still watching." A chill ran down Sergeant Evans' spine. "Who's watching, Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice tight with suspicion. Michael shook his head, as though trying to shake off thoughts that clung to him like a heavy fog. I don't know. I was never supposed to come back. None of us were." He sounded less like a man who had simply survived something tragic and more like someone who had been forced to survive, someone marked by something dark and unnatural. Sergeant Evans' patience began to wear thin. She needed answers. They all needed answers. "Mr. Carter, we need you to tell us where you've been all these years. We need to know what happened to your friends, to the other students." Michael's eyes flickered nervously. He glanced toward the door, as if he feared someone might be listening. "I can't. Not yet. Not until..." He stopped, swallowing hard, as though the words themselves were poison in his throat. But before anyone could press further, a forensic technician entered the room with a report. The officer handed it to Sergeant Evans. She read it quickly, her brow furrowing in disbelief. "Michael Carter, your fingerprints match. Your DNA, it's a match." For the first time since entering the station, Michael looked up, his eyes wide, like a man who had just been handed a death sentence. "I told you," he whispered. "I told you I was never supposed to come back. I shouldn't have come back." The officers watched him in stunned silence, trying to make sense of his words. They had been expecting a man who would explain the mystery, who would give them answers. Answers to the vanishing, to the school bus, to the bones. But instead, they had a man who seemed more like a puzzle, a man whose presence only deepened the mystery. "Mr. Carter, what do you mean by, you shouldn't have come back? Where were you for all these years? Where did you go? What happened to your classmates?" Sergeant Evans pressed, her voice calm but insistent. Michael's face twisted in terror. He stepped back from the desk, as though trying to distance himself from the question, from everything. I can't say. Not yet. They're still out there. They won't stop watching until it's all over." A cold, unnerving silence filled the room. The officers glanced at each other, unsure of how to proceed. The man they had hoped would offer closure, who would tell them the truth, was now trembling with fear. And then, just as quickly as he'd arrived, Michael Carter turned and walked toward the door. "I can't stay here," he said. "They'll find me if I stay here." Sergeant Evans rushed to stop him. "Mr. Carter, please, you have to," but before she could finish, he was gone. The door slammed behind him, and the officers were left with only more questions than before. They now had a living witness, Michael Carter, the only one who could explain what happened to the class of 1999. But whatever had happened to Michael, whatever had happened to the others, was far from over. The nightmare wasn't finished, it had only just begun. A few days later, Michael is sitting across from the investigators, his eyes wide with terror, a haunted look that hadn't faded in years. The room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. The last 2 hours had been spent in painstaking detail, going over his timeline, his memories, his recollections of the last time he'd seen his classmates. But now, at this pivotal moment, he was about to tell them everything. "They were all dead, you know," he began, his voice shaky but resolute. "The ones who didn't, the ones who resisted, they were never seen again, never heard from, just gone." Michael paused, his hands trembling slightly as he wiped them on his pants. He had been sitting in front of investigators for hours now, but the weight of his confession had never been so real, so suffocating. His words had already started to unravel the decades-old mystery. But this was the moment when the truth would finally emerge. "It started the day the bus broke down," he continued. "We were miles from the nearest road, deep in the forest. The engine sputtered and died. We couldn't move the bus, we couldn't get it started, so we waited and waited." Michael's voice quivered as he relived the memory, the dissonant sounds of the forest creeping back into his mind. "That's when they found us." He leaned forward, his gaze locking with the investigators. "They wore these robes, grey, like they'd been living in the dirt. I think they called themselves the Elect. They said they were from an off-grid sanctuary, a place of peace, a place to escape the outside world. They told us the world was falling apart, that society as we knew it was crumbling." Michael shook his head, his eyes drifting to the floor. "It sounded like a joke, but we were stuck. No one had signal on their phones, and none of us had any idea how to fix the bus. So, we vaulted them. We didn't have a choice." The investigators exchanged glances, their faces impassive but keenly focused. Michael was speaking now with more urgency, his voice rising as the story poured out. "At first, the commune was peaceful. It felt almost too good to be true. They gave us food and told us we could rest. They promised us everything we needed. They took care of us and gave us shelter. The air felt different there, like it had weight, like everything was slow. But after a while, things started to shift." Michael paused again, his breath catching in his throat. "They started talking about reconditioning, how we needed to let go of our old lives, our past. We weren't allowed to talk about where we came from, what we were running from. They told us we had to forget everything. They called it cleansing." The word hung in the air like a warning. Michael's eyes flickered with something akin to fear, something darker than mere recollection. "They gave us food," he continued, "but it didn't taste right. It was off, like they were drugging us, dulling us. Some of us started getting these vivid dreams, nightmares that felt too real, too intense. And then they started making us sleep in shifts, very controlled, very specific. They wanted to know when we were awake and when we were asleep. It didn't matter if you were tired, you had to follow the schedule." He rubbed his eyes, clearly exhausted by the memory. Some of the kids started to resist. They couldn't take it. They wanted to leave, but they were too afraid. They were terrified of what would happen if they didn't comply. I saw a few of them try to escape. I heard their screams when they were dragged into the woods. They were never seen again. The room was deathly quiet, the words hanging in the air like a sinister fog. Michael's lips trembled as he spoke again, his voice growing quieter. "They told us they were the elect, that the world had ended outside those woods. The only thing left was their commune. They said we were chosen to live in a new world, to be part of something greater. But it wasn't a choice, it was a prison. And those who didn't accept it..." He swallowed hard, his throat dry. They were sacrificed. Michael's eyes flickered with a cold, distant fear. I wasn't the only one who saw it. Those who tried to leave, the ones who fought back, they were offered up to the forest. No one ever came back. The investigators sat motionless, taking in every word. By 2008, I'd had enough. I found a way to escape. I ran as far and as fast as I could. But even then, I was too afraid to tell anyone. I kept quiet, I stayed hidden. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I kept quiet, they'd forget about me. That I could live my life. Michael's gaze darkened, his voice lowering to a whisper. I thought I was the only one. But when I heard the bus had been found, I knew. I knew they hadn't forgotten. I had to tell someone. I had to tell you all the truth. The room fell silent once more, the weight of Michael's words pressing down on everyone present. The investigators were stunned. What he had just described wasn't just a simple disappearance. It was a conspiracy, a cult, and it had taken 30 young lives. Lives that had been reconditioned, controlled, and sacrificed to something darker than anyone had ever imagined. Michael had escaped, but his classmates were never meant to. They had been chosen for a purpose. And the forest, the very forest that had hidden their remains for decades, held the final, horrifying truth. The world they had been told about wasn't gone. It was waiting for the next generation to take their place. When Michael first came forward, the reaction was mixed. Some parents clung to his every word, hoping for answers, desperately needing closure. They believed him. His story made sense in a way the authorities couldn't explain. But others, especially the families of the missing students, refused to believe him. They couldn't reconcile the image of their children with the grim picture Michael painted. To them, he was just a survivor, a man whose mind had been warped by the horrors he had endured. The divide in the community grew deeper. In the months following his return, some families openly accused Michael of being responsible for their children's deaths, while others saw him as a victim of the same tragedy. His credibility was questioned in every direction. The media had a field day, labeling him everything from a hero to a delusional maniac. But Michael never faltered in his resolve. He knew the truth, and it was more terrifying than anyone could imagine. Soon, Michael was placed in protective custody. The police couldn't risk him being silenced by those who still believed their children were out there, waiting to be found. They had no idea who could be trusted. There were too many loose ends, too many unanswered questions. The cult's role, the strange events in the forest, the missing students. None of it fit neatly into a single narrative. But Michael's story, disturbing as it was, offered a chilling glimpse into what had really happened. Months later, Michael published a memoir recounting his experiences and his unsettling journey through the heart of that forest. The book became a sensation, sparking new theories about the class of '99, the cult, and the twisted events that had unfolded in the woods. Some people believed every word, others dismissed it as the ramblings of a broken man. But one thing was certain. Michael had seen something beyond human comprehension, something that no one would ever be able to fully understand. The aftermath of the class of 1999's disappearance remained an open wound in the community. The forest still held its secrets, and the answers were buried deep beneath the moss and vines, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. Michael's memoir became a symbol of both truth and madness, a final, haunting chapter in the story of the students who vanished without a trace. As for the families of the missing, they were left to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives. Some continued to search for their children, convinced they were out there somewhere. Others, like the families who had always supported Michael, were left with only the grim knowledge that their loved ones had never truly come back. The forest had claimed them. And the truth was far darker than anyone had ever imagined. It had been months since Michael's memoir was published, and the frenzy over the class of '99 had not died down. The story still hung in the air like a shadow over the community, with families torn between hope and despair. Some were convinced Michael had fabricated everything. Others believed he had merely scratched the surface of something far darker. Michael had become a recluse, only emerging when necessary for interviews or to meet with authorities. But on a cool, overcast afternoon, he made his way back to Maplewood High School, the place that had once been filled with laughter, the bright futures of the class of '99, and the promise of a summer filled with adventures. Now it was a memorial, an empty reminder of what had been lost. He stood alone in front of the memorial dedicated to his classmates. The polished stone slabs, engraved with the names of every student who had disappeared, gleamed in the muted light, a symbol of the void that had consumed the town. Michael knelt down, pulling something from his jacket, a faded, moldy yearbook. He opened it carefully, the pages yellowed with time. There, at the back, was a note that only he could have written. He placed it gently inside the yearbook, tucking it under the cover where it wouldn't be found until someone looked closely. The note read, "We tried to leave. Only I made it. I'm sorry." For a long moment, Michael just stared at the memorial, the weight of his grief and guilt pressing down on him like the forest itself. He felt the memories of those lost, the faces of his friends, their laughter, and the horrific final days of their journey. And then, without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving behind only the yearbook and the haunting message for anyone brave enough to seek the truth. Some say Michael made it all up, created a story to explain the nightmares that had never left him. Others say the truth was even darker than he claimed, that what happened in the forest was far worse than anyone could imagine. But one thing is certain. What happened to the class of '99 still haunts the trees of Washington. Drop a comment below and let us know. Do you believe Michael's story, or is something even more disturbing still hidden in the woods? Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more unbelievable real-life mysteries. As Michael Carter vanished into the fading light, leaving only his cryptic note tucked within the moldy yearbook, the Pine Ridge National Forest stood silent, its ancient trees guarding secrets too dark to ever fully unravel. The class of '99 was gone, but their story lived on, a haunting enigma etched into the heart of Maplewood. Some believe Michael's tale of a sinister cult, others whisper of something older, something the forest itself claimed. One truth remains. The answers lie out there, beneath the moss and shadows, waiting for the brave, or the foolish, to seek them. What do you think happened to the class of '99? Share your thoughts below, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more spine-chilling mysteries that defy explanation.